I'm learning about problem solving, but not how to problem solve. It's like how do you define problem solving in terms of creativity? And the Runko is essentially saying, well, it depends on how you define problem, because not everybody agrees that creative acts are problem solving. So that's why I said last stream, I was like, you can define problems on a spectrum, and obstacles are the same thing on that spectrum also. Obstacles is something you overcome. Problems are something you also overcome. So the difference between them is the emotional coloring that play into how you talk about them in certain, well, just I guess in all contexts. Like we don't like problems, but obstacles can be cool. Like obstacle courses, right? Like those machines that, or no, those things that you blow up and you fill them with water, and like you gotta like navigate through it. Like it's like a water obstacle course. That's really fun, right? It's not called a problem course. Imagine. So yeah, that's. I think problems can be. I think that's probably the most useful way I can think about categorizing problems in terms of the creative sense. If we define it as obstacles rather than problems, you allow more for more creative freedom and less pressure from the stress that you might feel from having defined the scenario, the event, the situation, the context as a problem. So that's something useful and something to keep in mind. Because then we could talk about obstacles in the right way. And we can show how fun they actually are, rather than right off the bat defining them as problems themselves to solve. Because not everybody wants to solve problems. People want to have fun. And I guess they kind of do want to solve problems, but not problems. You want to solve obstacles, in the sense that you want to enjoy what you're doing. And if you can do that in an interesting way, you would. Yeah, then you would. Exactly. So, yeah. Yeah, so I believe that like the value that you can get out of like defining problems and obstacles. Like you can get the value, the true value out of defining it on a spectrum, and the spectrum is the emotional coloring of everything in between, as well as the two words on the extreme. Where I define on one extreme, it's the obstacles, where on the other one, it's the problems, right? And so problems tend to be negatively associated, whereas obstacles tend to be more neutral to positive, right? And so that's really useful, because at that point, if we can understand those things, with that fundamental kind of idea, that fundamental aspect, we can have our cake and eat it too. Yeah. And so in that sense, like leading off to that point, the goalpost that we get to, right, during the goalpost that we get to will be, you know, like it allows someone to not ultimately assume what's going to occur, right? Like I said before, like nobody really wants to solve problems. Like why? Well, it's because when they've done it before, things didn't go so well, right? There were consequences, right? Rather, you know, if you go through obstacles, it's like, well, okay, you're going through them, and then you know, most of the time it's like it's a neutral to positive context, where it's like you're going through an obstacle course, and then, you know, your friend's like, you know, cheering you on, having fun, but then he sees you like kind of like stumble, and he's like, oh, and then, you know, your friend happens to be some sort of connoisseur of the obstacle course, because he, you know, I guess he they took you there. and he tells you, like, he's like, after everything's done, it's like, oh yeah, like, you know, like you kind of hesitated there, like I found out this really cool technique where if you know, and then he describes that, or yeah, and so, you know, it becomes something fun, it becomes feedback, and then you could do it better, right, rather than problems where it's like, you know, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And that, see, that, and like, our minds tend to go there. It's like, what's the worst that can happen, right? So that's something to really know. It's something, this spectrum allows us to highlight where people are assuming the journey, right? And ultimately, what we can get out of that is better ways to take what's useful out of those experiences and putting them in a completely different context, a different explanation that highlights all the play, all the stress-free aspects that we can you know, come to embracing. Yeah, so that allows us to get through that thing at our best, our more, you know, through it allows us to be more creative in that process, right? More, or at least it you know, it enhances that. So rather than something negative where it's like, you know, anxiety comes, or, you know, or something happens where it's like there's like a stun. Yeah, and so yeah, that's where the useful useful thing is there. So it's something to really think about. Bum, 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 bum.